Chapter 91. The 15 Li Realm. Li Wushuang's pupils contracted, horrified to the extreme, her mind buzzing, somewhat dazed. She couldn't move her entire body, tightly bound by an invisible force, unable to even turn over. It was complete suppression of her cultivation realm. She shouted in anger, "Bastard! Let me go!" Your brother was saying the same thing back then, Li Wushuang, holding back her fury yesterday. Didn't realize that Li Hao wasn't one to take things lying down either, seeing her still so insolent. He struck her with another dozen hard slaps. If it weren't for an object-controlling force holding her up on the other side, the power of those dozen slaps would have been enough to crack the ground. Of course, Li Wushuang, being in the divine travel realm, could bear it, but it was painful enough to make her bite her lip and her eyes reddened. "You, let me go!" She struggled with all her might. Her divine soul flew out, trying to shake off Li Hao, but was pressed back into her body by Li Hao's divine soul, completely restrained. Still not convinced? "You bastard!" Li Hao unleashed another succession of slaps suddenly. He heard muffled sobs from beneath his hand. Li Hao paused a moment, looked down, and saw the daughter of heaven who had returned home yesterday. Now her eyes were red-rimmed, her face wet with teardrops like pearls. She had been beaten to tears. The elegant and cold pride she had just the day before was gone. Like a fairy who had stepped dignified from the mist, suddenly slipped and fell to the mundane world. Li Hao stopped his hand upon seeing this and said in a mild tone, "Convinced now?" Li Wushuang lay across the back of the horse, biting her lip, stubbornly silent, only letting a few more tears fall. Li Hao didn't fall for it, sneered, and said, "Cousin, if you're still not convinced, believe it or not, they'll strip you naked, block your power, and hang you on this tree branch." Li Wushuang suddenly looked up, shocked as she stared at Li Hao. Could these words even be spoken by a person? "I'm your cousin." On the side, Li Yuanzhao was taken aback, but soon, his eyes lit up slightly. Li Hao naturally wouldn't harbor any indecent thoughts toward Li Wushuang. He was purely threatening her. "I'll count to 3. He scoffed. You wouldn't dare." Li Wushuang paled, angry and anxious, with a touch of fear too. "You won. I submit," Li Wushuang hurriedly said. She wasn't familiar with this cousin and really couldn't grasp his nature, growing somewhat fearful in her heart. Li Hao had expected this, smiled coldly. A trick like this was particularly convenient and effective on a 16-year-old girl. With a casual toss, Li Hao threw her out, no longer binding her with the object-controlling force. Realizing she could move again, Li Wushuang immediately turned and gracefully landed on the ground, wiping away the tears on her face as she fell. And as soon as she landed, she turned and looked resentfully at Li Hao. "Cousin, you'd better not try to complain." Li Hao sat high on the red blood horse, looking down at her calmly and casually. "And don't provoke me again, if you come to make trouble without reason. Next time I'll do exactly as I said." Li Wushuang gritted her teeth. She had never faced such humiliation, even as a disciple of the Chenji sect, or suffered such a loss. What's harder for her to accept was that the cousin who was 2 years younger than her had reached the 15 Li realm. Her cultivation level was higher than hers by 1 realm. How could this be possible? Didn't her brother say that he used to be a martial arts invalid and only started cultivating smoothly at the age of 8 or 9? From 8 or 9 years old to now, it's only been a few years, right? Li Wushuang's mind was in complete disarray. Today's events were as unbelievable to her as seeing a ghost cousin. Hao is right. It was Li Yun who provoked Hao in the first place. "You're totally in the wrong, and you can't beat Hao either," Li Yuanzhao said on the side, advising her. Seeing Li Wushuang's slightly hunched body, seemingly unable to straighten her back, he felt a bit of pity. After all, he had been full of expectations for this cousin before yesterday, having heard since he was little how she had been a disciple under a famous master, and he had looked up to her with admiration. Li Wushuang clenched her teeth and glared at the little fatty, saying, "Don't give me your cold comfort." Li Yuanzhao was at a loss for words. He was sincerely trying to persuade her, so how had it turned into cold comfort? But she was clearly furious, and even a tree branch by the road would have gotten slapped if it touched her. So he stopped poking the bear. "Were you always hiding your strength? Taught by granduncle yourself?" Li Wushuang glared at Li Hao, full of shame and anger with their blood relationship. She naturally wouldn't have any other sort of thoughts, but was simply humiliated by the beating. "What's it to you?" Li Hao snorted. "If it were someone else today, you'd already be dead with how brainless you are." Li Wuxuang was so furious she gritted her teeth. She had come back with the intention of fighting for the position of the true dragon at yesterday's family feast. She had already touched base with her second mother after all, among the third generation. The ones with the most hope of competing were nothing but her and Li Qianfeng, and she had made up her mind to emulate an ancestor, to remain unmarried for life and take charge of the Li family. Yet, who could have expected to be thoroughly chastised by Li Hao today? "Don't keep bothering me. I don't have time for you." Li Hao glanced at her, lightly flicked the reins, and the red blood horse trotted past her with ease. "You!" Li Wuxuang trembled with rage, wanting to strike out but holding back. She had many cultivation techniques, secret moves of the Chenji sect, but the gap between the divine travel realm and the 15 Li realm was too vast. Just the power of object manipulation alone rendered her immobile, making any special technique useless. Unless she also stepped into the 15 Li realm, she would not be qualified to fairly fight Li Hao and regain her pride. Chapter 92. Gazing at the silhouettes of the two youths riding away, Li Wuxuang felt a surging rage consuming her. But suddenly, she thought of something. The other was only 14 years old, yet he had reached the 15 Li realm. This had seemed to have broken Uncle Jess' record. Her pupils constricted slightly, and it was as if a bolt from the blue had shattered through her mind. That invincible figure whom she had looked up to from a young age in her heart had been surpassed by someone else. Her shock was soon replaced by a fiery, stinging pain on her buttocks, snapping her back to reality. She couldn't help but cover it gently with her hand, only to see a faint trace of fresh blood seeping through her dress. She bit her lower lip, feeling an inexplicable sense of grievance welling up inside her. And her eyes reddened once more. "How? Didn't you go a little too harsh just now?" Li Yuanzhao expressed his concern to Li Hao as they rode further away. His eyes were small, but when they rode past, he had caught a glimpse of the faint redness, just a minor flesh wound. "It will heal in a couple of days with some medicine," Li Hao replied indifferently. "If I was hard on her, it was for her own good. Didn't you see her temperament at last night's family banquet? Early fame isn't necessarily a blessing. Surrounded by flattery, even a pig would start to fly, utterly blind to its own faults. Though she has learned skills from the Chenji sect, she has been praised for too long. It's better to correct such behavior while she's still young. Otherwise, if she continues to be like this, she will suffer greatly out in the world sooner or later." Li Yuanzhao was stunned. He hadn't thought as far ahead as Li Hao had. However, upon reflection, he felt that Li Hao was indeed right. He couldn't help but admire Li Hao even more. "How? I've noticed that when you speak and act, you seem to always stand on the same side as my parents' generation," Li Yuanzhao said. Li Hao glanced at him. His soul had belonged to a person of two lives, and his inner age really did match that of his Uncle Wu's generation. Hence his stern approach was somewhat in the manner of an elder educating the younger, from the beginning to the end. He had never treated these three generations as his peers. It wasn't arrogance, but simply a matter of mindset. While Li Hao and Li Yuanzhao were off to Tan Palace Academy for school, the Divine General Mansion was suddenly a hive of activity. Li Wuxuang had just quietly returned to the mansion, secretly changed into a new set of clothes, and then rummaged through her room to find the medicinal powder used to treat muscles and bones from when she was 6 or 7 years old, applying it to herself and wrapping it with a soft cloth. During the whole process, her indignation towards Li Hao intensified, but thinking of his cultivation level, she felt complicated emotions stirring inside her. She also realized to some extent that she might have been wrong. After she had changed the dressing and put on new clothes, she heard the commotion outside and was puzzled. She immediately thought of Li Hao. Had his cultivation level been revealed to her mother and the others? Yet she hadn't had the chance to tell anyone about it. When she stepped out of the side courtyard and asked a house servant, she learned that it wasn't about Li Hao, but that the lord who had been guarding northern Yen was returning. The news of the lord's return had electrified the whole of Qizhou city. In this land of Qinzhou, the Li family was the undisputed king, with timeless merits known to everyone in the city, and statues of the family were found everywhere, with 4 martial temples also constructed. The ordinary citizens within the city might not feel as strongly, but in Qizhou the sentiment ran deep. Everyone knew how difficult and how great the Li family was. The loss of 6 sons out of 9 was not just a simple matter this time. After 14 years of conquest in northern Yen, slaying countless demons, just the merit list for demon slaying alone filled 3 thick volumes. When the triumphant troops reached 30 li outside Qinzhou City, people had already sent the news back into the city, back to the Li family. The news excited all the common folk in the city. Many of them went to greet the party spontaneously. Some vendors selling at the morning market also packed up their stalls or left their business to capable family members, taking food and drink from home to go welcome the renowned demon-slaying commander. 30 li along the official road, people came in a steady stream, and as time went by, the crowd grew larger. Some heard the wrong message and ran to the wrong city gate. Outside the east gate, there was a dense sea of heads standing still on both sides of the road, craning their necks in anticipation. Soon, with that striking battle flag billowing in the wind at the far end of the road lined with cypress trees, countless waiting commoners burst into excited cheers, loudly calling out the name known throughout the land, Lord of Martial Valor, triumphant return. Long live the divine general mansion. Lord of martial valor, triumphant return. Long live the divine general mansion. The rising and falling shouts, wave-like, attested to the Li family's prestige, making passing martial artists and merchants from other towns stare in amazement. After some inquiry, they learned the reason, realizing that during 14 years of peace, in the lands of northern Yan, many had fought bloody battles, slaying countless demons. The returning procession was not long. It was the Fatsi camp's trusted aid squadron that Lord Martial Valor had originally led into battle. However, the formidable 500 who had departed 14 years ago now numbered less than 100. Some had lost arms, others had heads wrapped in bandages. They were a band of wounded soldiers, but the battle flag alone remained wildly and dominantly unfurling. Some commoners, seeing those wounded soldiers, instantly teared up, coming forward to offer the eggs from their baskets and the cured meats in their hands to these returning warriors. The Li family was as loving to the people as to their own children, enjoying immense prestige in Qizhou City, so these commoners were not afraid. This scene left onlookers from outside the city stunned, although they too had seen victorious armies return. They would only dare to watch from afar, deterred by the solemn air that made them fearful to approach. Yet the Li family and the commoners were as close as fish and water, interacting in extreme harmony. Meanwhile, Li Hao, who had just arrived at the Tan Palace not long ago, received the news. Shen Yunqing, gasping for breath, ran to find Li Hao. "What are you doing here? Your father, Lord Martial Valor, has returned in triumph." Excitement was inevitably mixed in Shen Yunqing's voice. In Qingzhou City, it was hard not to be influenced by the Li family. Li Hao was momentarily stunned. His parents had returned? Fragmented memories instantly surfaced in his mind. But so much time had passed, 14 years, that they had turned him from a child into a youth. So much time that many things were almost forgotten. After a brief pause, he quickly came to his senses and thanked Shen Yunqing. Then he took to the sky, flying out swiftly, watching Li Hao fly away with such speed. Shen Yunqing's eyes widened slightly before he stroked his beard and sighed. The Li family's true dragon of this generation is even more extraordinary than the last. Li Hao rushed out of the Tan Palace Academy and down the mountain. Kicking open the stable, Li Hao leaped onto the red blood horse he had ridden that morning and sped away with a flick of the whip on the streets within the city. The crisp sound of hooves rang out as the young man galloped swiftly, with passers-by swiftly making way. Once they saw the red blood horse, some startled passers-by revealed a look of relief. Finally, when Li Hao arrived at the official road, outside the city at top speed on the red blood horse, he saw the banners waving at the end of the road and a majestic figure seated on a dragon lion slowly approaching at the front. He quickly reined in his horse. The steed let out a long neigh, and its hooves lightly touched the ground as they landed. A dragon and a horse, a father and a son. In that moment, their gazes met. Chapter 93. Red Blood Horse. Li Tiangang sat with a solemn composure on the back of the dragon lion, catching sight of the youth in the middle of the official road at the end of his line of vision. He immediately recognized the war horse the other was riding on, and upon looking at the boy's features, found him surprisingly handsome and bright, especially around his eyes and eyebrows, which resembled those of the lover etched in his heart. Li Tiangang's heart jolted. Li Hao was also staring at the robust and composed man. The blurry images in his memory suddenly seemed to clear. He was the man who, 14 years ago, had tousled his head with a rough, large hand. It had been 14 years, yet in that brief collision of gazes, they had both recognized each other's identity in the blink of an eye. Whoosh! Li Tiangang suddenly leaped into the air from atop the dragon lion, landing in front of the youth's red blood horse. The youth, too, Swiftly dismounted. It was common sense not to converse with one's father while still on horseback. However, Li Tiangang's voice trembled slightly. Li Hao sensed the concern and deep emotions in his voice, and the foreignness he initially felt dissipated in an instant. Perhaps this was the feeling of blood ties? Father, Li Hao spoke as well, his voice a bit stiff and embarrassed, but he knew that the man before him was his father in this life. Li Tiangang excitedly took Li Hao into his arms. 14 years had not seen each other, and now his child had grown so big. His emotions surged in that broad embrace and strong arms. Li Hao immediately felt a real sense of security. At this moment, his heart seemed to settle. His hands also gently wrapped around his father's waist, but suddenly thinking of something, his gaze swept around, asking, "Where's mother?" As he spoke, he felt the man embracing him tremble slightly. Li Hao's face changed abruptly, and it felt as though his blood might freeze in his veins any moment. Li Tiangang slowly let go of Li Hao, his dark, deep eyes suddenly showing traces of bloodshot and sorrow. "Your mother, she's gone?" Li Hao's thoughts seemed to jam for a moment. The woman with the bright and concerned eyes in his memory was gone. It felt as if a delicate painting had shattered in the darkness. Li Hao abruptly turned to look back at the triumphant procession. The countless envious and concerned glances and voices cast from both sides of the road were all ignored and blocked by him, except for the wounded. However, among them, there was not the beautiful figure that had held him 14 years ago. Li Hao's complexion turned ugly, and he said, "How could it be? Wasn't mother always with you? Didn't you both share life and death together?" Li Tiangang's lips quivered slightly but did not utter a word. Li Hao fiercely turned to face him. "When did mother pass away, and why haven't I ever heard grandmother mention it?" A few months ago, Li Tiangang fell into a short silence. I sealed the news and didn't let it spread. As he spoke this, he saw Li Hao seemed about to say something else, and with a generous palm, he patted his son's shoulder. "Let's go. We'll talk more when we get back." Li Hao's heart, once full of joy, now felt somewhat dispirited. The common folk by the road continued to cheer, singing the praises of the Marquis of Xingwu's triumphant return and extolling the Li family's glorious military achievements. Only Li Hao, pulled up onto the back of the dragon lion, sharing the mount with his father, knew on this day he had lost his mother back at the Divine General Mansion. He, Jianlan, Lu Yurong, and numerous ladies were all gathered, having arrived at the mountain and river courtyard early. Waiting, Li Xuanli had even run to the mansion gate, anxiously pacing back and forth until Li Tiangang appeared. Only then did the brothers smile at each other. After a deep embrace, Li Xuanli smacked Li Tiangang's armored chest with force, then soon after tousled Li Hao's head, laughing as he looked around. "Where's my sister-in-law?" Li Tiangang's expression changed slightly, shaking his head. "Well, talk back at the mansion." Li Xuanli paused, his face turning grave, only then noticing that the small figure he had ruffled didn't react at all. The smile on Li Xianli's face also disappeared, and he nodded slightly, accompanying them back home. Inside the mountain and river courtyard with Li Tiangang's return, the place was bustling with excitement, but soon they learned that the seventh lady, Ji Qingqing, had not come back. Li Tiangang only spoke two simple words: "She's gone." The atmosphere in the courtyard immediately turned chilly. Everyone exchanged glances, showing a hint of sad regret in their eyes. They had been through many such events already. People one after another stepped forward to comfort both Li Tiangang and Li Hao. Only he, Jianlan, watched from a distance, sighed, and said nothing. Li Wushuang, who had been soundly beaten by Li Hao that morning and still felt a residual pain in her buttocks, watched the boy who stood beside his father in silence. Her heart did not revel in his misfortune. Instead, she felt startled and sympathetic, with her previous grievances suddenly dissipating. Although she had wanted to teach Li Hao a lesson and was angry at being humiliated by him, after all, they were relatives by blood, both members of the Li family, and she had never truly harbored any thoughts of harming him. The celebration that had been prepared ended almost perfunctorily, but ultimately, they still had to eat dinner. During the meal, everyone spoke in hushed tones, asking Li Tiangang about the situation in northern Yen over the years. Although the remarkable events were reported to the family through military dispatches, the details were never fully revealed. But now, years of pent-up stories could be shared in bits and pieces. As the sun set in the west and the ladies of each court left, Li Xuanli wanted to stay and keep company with Tiangang. But his wife pulled him away. Gao. Qingqing saw her husband's intentions, feeling slightly miffed, pulled him aside, and whispered, "What can you comfort with just a few words in such a situation? They're father and son who haven't seen each other for years. Why are you in the way here?" Chapter 94. Li Xuanli finally had a moment of epiphany, holding his wife's delicate hand. He silently lamented how fortunate he was to have such a virtuous wife. Then he bid farewell to Li Tiangang and led his wife and children back home. Soon, only Li Tiangang remained in the courtyard, along with his personal attendants brought back from northern Yen and others in the household like Li Hao and Zhao during the meal. Li Hao, hearing other aunts ask questions, also learned about many matters concerning northern Yen. Typical wars lasted perhaps 2 or 3 years, rarely stretching to 7 or 8, but this protracted conflict had already spanned over a decade, mainly due to the demon race's sanctum forces from the north who sought to tear apart northern Yen as a breach to occupy and gain a strategic advantage against Dayu. From the conversation, Li Hao also learned that although Dayu was at the peak of its power, prosperity did not mean the frontier was without trouble. In any dynasty, there were always soldiers stationed at the border, as there were always aggressors. It was merely a question of how many. However, judging from this war, it was evident that Dayu had not completely eradicated its external foes, or rather, the territories and demon tribes once subdued by the late emperor of Dayu were showing signs of resurgence thousands of years later. Dayu was like an aging lion. Signs of decline were beginning to show amid its golden age, but who knew how many centuries its remaining prestige could deter its enemies? Li Hao wanted to ask his mother for details about the incident, but as soon as he mentioned it, Li Tiangang's expression turned sour as he shook his head and simply said, "However, I have let your mother down. From now on, only you and I will accompany each other in this courtyard." Li Hao remained silent. He suddenly realized the grief over his mother's incident was not his alone to bear. That she had rushed to the far-flung borders with her husband overnight was a testament to their deep marital love. Over the years, Li Hao had heard many anecdotes about his parents' affectionate youth in the residence. Although he had only spent just under 100 days with his mother, his father had been with her for over a decade. Their bond so profound that it was likely beyond Li Hao's own reach. After a brief silence, Li Hao still asked, "Has mother's vengeance been avenged?" Li Tiangang's body trembled slightly, then he nodded slowly. "It has." Li Hao exhaled softly. "That's good." Father and son looked at each other, speechless. Li Hao had intended to say much, to inquire about many things. But from listening to his father converse with the aunts, learning of the hardships of the war in northern Yen, among other things, any long-standing resentment in his heart had dissipated. Now, for the moment, he could not think of anything else to say. It seems that since ancient times, silence has often been the default between father and son. In the silence, it was Li Tiangang who broke it first, speaking softly. "However, these years I haven't been by your side. You've had a hard time." Li Hao shook his head slightly, smiling. "Not at all. I had Zhao to accompany me. Second uncle taught me fishing. Fifth uncle played chess with me, and Granny treated me well. Ninth aunt also occasionally brought over delicious snacks from the royal household for me." He began recounting the amusing incidents over the years to his father, but what Li Hao didn't notice was that while Li Tiangang initially smiled as he listened, his brow slowly furrowed. "Does that mean you didn't practice much after your meridians became unblocked?" Li Tiangang asked seriously. Li Hao was taken aback, scratching his head. "I did cultivate, it's just there's nothing interesting to say about that." Li Tiangang gave him a look and sighed inwardly. "It's getting late. You should go back and get some rest." Seeing the exhausted look on his father's face and thinking of the long journey back from northern Yen, Li Hao did not say much more, nodded, and got up to leave. After Li Hao had left, Li Tiangang called for Zhao. "Where's Li Fu?" Li Fu is in Songyu City. The young master was enrolled at Tan Palace Academy, and Li Fu had gone there on a mission and secretly protected him. Unfortunately, he got injured and is recuperating there. He's already sent a letter saying he's on his way back. Zhao replied with a respectful smile to the renowned warrior he had watched grow up. Li Tianggang's expression changed. "Injured? Did Hao face an assassination attempt?" "No, he only told me to look after the young master well and mentioned there would be great news to share upon his return," said Zhao. "Great news?" Li Tiangang was puzzled. How could there be good news despite being injured? He thought for a moment. Songyu City was under the jurisdiction of Qi State, the Xia family, not too far but not too near either. On a fast horse, one could likely return to the residence in 2 days. "Zhao, tell me about Hao Er's situation over these years," Li Tiangang requested, gesturing to the cushion beside him. Zhao was taken aback for a moment, then sat down and smilingly said, "My lord, Why not ask the young master directly? After so many years, you must have a lot to discuss. Isn't this a good opportunity to talk about these things? Li Tiangang shook his head slightly and sighed. I noticed how Heir's manner is casual and his conduct sometimes lacks restraint. He seems to have missed some guidance over these years, growing a bit wild. It's better if you tell me, my lord, you're being too harsh. Although the young master is a bit carefree, he is undoubtedly a good child. He has a kind heart, never treating the servants harshly, and he always shows proper respect to the elders in every residence, never overstepping bounds in all. These years, he hasn't caused any trouble except maybe a few years back when he tampered with some odd things in the kitchen. Just tell me about his cultivation. Li Tiangang cut him off impatiently. Zhao hesitated, then said after thinking. Well, seeing Zhao hemming and hawing, Li Tiangang's expression grew stern. Does that mean he has not practiced at all? Not exactly, as Zhao stammered. Li Tiangang's face darkened. Chapter 95. Has he become disheartened? Now that his meridians are unblocked, what does it matter if his foundation establishment comes later than others? With my immortal bloodline, he can surpass his peers in the early stages. By the time he reaches the stage of inheriting the spirit and divine traveling, with the support of the cultivation techniques from Listening Rain Tower and the aid of our ancestral spirits from the mausoleum, he will be able to enter the Qian list and at least have the capability to defend himself. How could he let himself fall to such a state? Zhao had an embarrassed look on his face and said, actually, the young master has been working hard at playing? Li Tiangang gave him a sideways glance, a look that carried the remains of his authority from the battlefield, causing a slight tremor in Zhao's heart. It seems you have all been too indulgent with him, spoiling him to the point of arrogance. Don't you realize that's harming him? Li Tiangang said sternly. Zhao couldn't sit still any longer, and he quickly stood up. Master, it's my lack of supervision, the old servant's fault. Li Tiangang was taken aback and suddenly realized he had been too serious. The decade-plus of relentless battlefield life had not allowed him to relax yet. Seeing the butler who had looked after him since he was a child bowing to apologize, he felt somewhat remorseful. He let out a long sigh and said, it has nothing to do with you. Hauer has simply been given too much favor. Zhao bowed his head, not daring to answer any further. Li Tiangang suddenly lost interest and waved his hand. Go rest for now. Zhao hesitated, then bowed his head and retreated. The next day, Li Hao slept in. Since his father had returned, it was natural he should spend more time with him. There was no need to go to Tan Palace Academy these days. Anyway, there was nothing much for him there. He would either draw by the cold pond or find old Shin for a game of chess. And some drinks. Perhaps it was the ruminations before he went to sleep, but in his dreams, Li Hao saw those eyes, holding him and gently soothing him to sleep, when suddenly a horde of demons surrounded them. Young master. Suddenly, a soft call came to his ear. Li Hao started, waking up with a jolt. Opening his eyes, he saw a young man standing by his bed. When did you come in? Li Hao couldn't help but ask. He recognized the young man. He was one of the attendants who had returned with his father from battle yesterday, appearing to be in his late 20s, with a slender figure and sharp eyes. Young master, the master has asked me to call you. It's time to train in the front courtyard. The young man, Yu Xian, said with a smile. Li Hao sighed inwardly, realizing that his days of leisure were over, thinking of the beautiful dream he had just been interrupted from. His face darkened. From now on, without my permission, you are not allowed to enter my room. Yu Xian nodded. Yes. Only then did Li Hao reluctantly sit up and called for Qing Ji to prepare fresh, clean clothes for him to change into. Seeing Li Hao's demeanor reminiscent of a pampered young master, Yu Xian stood silently on the side. His expression unchanged, however. Li Hao was moving slower than he had anticipated, standing there carelessly while the maids slowly dressed him. Yu Xian couldn't help but remind him, young master, the master is already waiting for you. Li Hao blinked and then quickly dressed himself, saying, let's go. The two left the room and headed towards the front courtyard. As they passed the main house, Li Hao casually glanced inside and suddenly froze, a look of shock crossing his face as he rushed into the building. Inside, all the calligraphy and paintings he had accumulated over the years were gone. Zhao. Li Hao called out in a hurry. Zhao hurried over from the front yard. Young master, where are my paintings? Li Hao revealed a rare expression of anger towards Zhao. Zhao's face changed slightly as he hesitated. These paintings, the master saw them this morning, and he had them all moved away. Moved where? The woodshed. On hearing this, Li Hao immediately felt a rage rushing to the crown of his head. The woodshed? Were they planning to burn all of his paintings like trash? If it were other paintings, it wouldn't be a big deal. But among those paintings were the ones he had sketched of his mother, whose memory had already become blurred. Bring them back immediately. Move them all back. From now on, no one is allowed to touch my paintings. Li Hao clenched his teeth and enunciated every word. Zhao, who had never seen Li Hao this furious in all these years, was a bit stunned. He quickly responded, "Young master, don't worry, they'll take care of it right away." But just as he was about to leave, a hand stopped him. Yu Xian blocked Zhao, still with an unaffected expression, and said to Li Hao, "Young master, it was the marshal who ordered the paintings to be moved. You should come with me for your training now." Li Hao had already guessed that no one but his father, who had just returned the day before, would dare touch his paintings. Yet hearing this confirmed, a fierce rage seethed within him, uncontrollable. "Get out of my way." Li Hao glared at him furiously. Yu Xian looked at Li Hao calmly, his arm unmoving in the military. He only obeyed Li Tiangang's orders. It was the same in the mountain and river courtyard, because he, Li Tiangang, was the true master of this place. Li Hao's fists clenched, his gaze fixated on him. "I said it once, get lost. Who do you want to get lost?" Suddenly, a voice came from the side as Li Tiangang approached, his expression somewhat dark. Yu Xian lowered his arm and bowed to him. "Father." Those paintings of seeing his father approaching, Li Hao began to speak in a hurry. Before he could finish, Li Tiangang shook his head and said with a cold face, "Apologize to Uncle Yuxuan." Li Hao froze. Then his eyes widened in disbelief as he looked at his father. Zhao's face also changed, and he quickly added, "Master." The young master was just anxious about the paintings. Those are his hard work over the years, and he just got a little carried away in the heat of the moment's silence. Li Tiangang rarely scolded him so sharply. Zhao froze. Li Tiangang's expression was one of anger. The previous night, he had already felt some discontent, and this morning when he saw the house filled with scrolls and paintings, chessboards, and several fishing rods carelessly placed on the racks next to the main hall, it looked like a mess, and it immediately made him furious. Chapter 96. Just looking at these things, you can tell Li Hao is more than just neglecting his cultivation. He's indeed indulging in distractions to the point of losing his ambition. Yet, oddly enough, everyone in the household still spoils him so much. He knows Li Hao is his son, is the young master here with a noble status. Zhao and the others dare not disobey Li Hao, his elder sister-in-law, and the rest probably don't feel it's their place to discipline him much either. But now that he has returned, it's imperative to change all of this and properly set Li Hao on the right path to cultivate the proper way. Immediately, right now, apologize to your Uncle Yuxuan. After chastising Zhao, Li Tiangang turned his head to glance at Li Hao. His face serious and stern, Li Hao stared blankly at him, feeling a sense of unfamiliarity, an incredulous feeling as if he's meeting him for the first time. It was just yesterday. Suddenly, he felt a trace of amusement in his heart. Yes, it was just yesterday that they had just met. But how much did he really know about this father of his? And how much did this father know about him, really? He gazed at the man before him and said, "Is it because you think I don't cultivate? What if I told you I do practice, and that my realm is quite high?" Li Tiangang's eyes showed no sign of change as he replied seriously and coldly, "I don't care how capable you are. Uncle Yuxuan has followed me through life and death over the years. Do you know how many demons he has slain? How many people he has saved? He's in the heavenly human realm. He's a grandmaster," Li Tiangang articulated. "A grandmaster must not be insulted, even if you are my son. Today you must apologize." Hearing this, Li Hao couldn't help but want to laugh. Only he felt that his smile was incredibly sad. A grandmaster must not be insulted. Then do you know what's in those paintings of mine? Before he could finish speaking, a figure suddenly rushed into the courtyard. Upon seeing Li Tiangang and Li Hao, he exclaimed excitedly, "My lord, young master!" The two turned their heads to look, and the one who had rushed in was Li Fu. His face filled with excitement and agitation. Li Fu had hurried back from Congyu City. Just as he arrived on the official road dozens of miles outside Qingzhou City, he heard travelers at a roadside tea stall discussing that the lord of the Li family had returned. Overjoyed upon hearing the news, Li Fu immediately hastened back at full speed. Li Fu. Seeing Li Fu, Li Tiangang's expression softened a bit, but then he noticed the other party barging in directly like this, behaving so carelessly. Such behavior was not like the composed and meticulous manner he used to display when following him, after not seeing him for several years. He was also so undisciplined. Li Hao, seeing that it was Fu, showed no significant change in expression, as they had only parted for a short while. After a few years, have you also lost all sense of discipline? Li Tiangang said. Frowning slightly, Li Fu was startled, then quickly realized his mistake and hastily gave his respects. Then he glanced at Li Hao, his face unable to hide his joy, and said, "My lord, I sent you a letter. Did you receive it?" "A letter," Li Tiangang said. "Was it sent to Northern Yen? When was it sent? I didn't receive it." Li Fu suddenly realized that by the time he had sent the letter, his lord must have already begun the journey home. During his time recovering, he had inquired about the Battle of Tsangyu City and, after understanding the details, found it hard to believe. He later sought confirmation from city defender Yu Shuhong and, upon getting it verified from him, convinced himself of the truth upon learning of the matter. He didn't first send a letter home, but to Northern Yen. After all, such shocking and astounding good news naturally had to be informed to Li Hao's parents first, as they were the most trustworthy. As for sending word to the family home, that was secondary. He planned to return and tell the second uncle himself, and also to inquire whether they already knew about Li Hao's circumstances. "It's all right if you didn't receive it, since you've returned, my lord. I can tell you in person just the same," Li Fu said with a beaming smile, glancing at Li Hao, his voice revealing a slight tremble of excitement. Young master has reached the 15 Li realm. Chapter 97. As Li Fu finished speaking, a hushed silence seemed to fall over the courtyard. Yao's eyes, full of wrinkles, slowly widened in disbelief as he looked at Li Fu and then turned to look at Li Hao. 15 Li realm. Li Tiangang and Yu Xian beside him were stunned, their faces showing surprise. Li Tiangang, seeing Li Fu so excited, knew that given Li Fu's careful nature, he would never make groundless claims, but the news was too thrilling and shocking for him. Really? Howard hasn't established his foundation nor undergone blood melting, has he? Li Tiangang couldn't help but say excitedly. Li Fu nodded vigorously, joyfully saying, "It's true. Absolutely true. I don't know the reason either, only Hao knows. I guess the second uncle secretly helped him." Second uncle? Li Tiangang's heart shook violently. The second uncle was at the Four Stands realm. And that realm had a power that made countless martial artists scream with envy. That was to defy the heavens and change fate. They could help a person alter their destinies. Even if it was a naturally untalented beggar, their fortunes could be reversed, turning them into unparalleled geniuses, the dragon and phoenix among people. Therefore, a family with a Four Stands realm member, even if it declined for a generation, could still pull itself back up. Of course, continuous decline would not be feasible because the Four Stands realm's destiny-changing power could only be used once. For only one person. Thinking of this, Li Tiangang felt deeply thankful, with his eyes turning red. How come his son, who neither had the merit nor the capability, managed to receive such affection from the second uncle? Good, this is wonderful. Li Tiangang said good 3 times in succession, his voice trembling until he moderated it, took a deep breath and looked softly at the youth before him. With such great news, why didn't you tell me earlier? Li Hao, seeing his excitement, felt hardly any ripples in his heart, only a slight stirring. "I wanted to tell you yesterday, but you asked me to rest early and interrupted." Li Tiangang suddenly remembered last night's conversation and couldn't help but feel at a loss. When he heard Li Hao talking about trivial matters that were off topic, he couldn't bear to listen and asked Li Hao to rest. "Well, let's not dwell on the past," Li Tiangang said with a smile. "When did you reach the 15 Li realm? Why haven't you written to tell me all these years? Did the second uncle forbid you to speak of it?" Li Hao asked in return. "Even if I told you, what could you have done? Could you have come back?" Li Tiangang paused slightly, looking into the young man's calm, black eyes, and suddenly felt as if his heart had been pricked, but then a wave of anger surged. "At least your mother and I would have been happy for you. We would have asked your aunt to find a grandmaster to teach you." Li Hao said, "A grandmaster? Isn't it enough to be taught by the second uncle? Are you still not satisfied with my cultivation level?" Li Tiangang was taken aback, at a loss for words. Indeed, the second uncle at the Four Stands realm was also comparable to a grandmaster, but for the Li family descendants to take a grandmaster as a teacher, it wasn't just for learning. It was also an accumulation of connections for each generation. That way, when the older generation is gone, those favors might not be of much use to the next generation. Generation after generation, a millennium of heritage. Connections are one of the great Foundations, these connections might not be needed on a daily basis, but at critical moments, they could be a tremendous help. You're taking this too lightly. Li Tiangang shook his head, feeling that Li Hao was still naive and didn't argue with him further. In his heart, Li Hao retorted, "You are the one who is naive." Li Fu, watching this father and son, also noticed something amiss. How come it seemed that there was a sense of estrangement and a gap between the Lord and the young master? You are only 14 years old and have stepped into the 15th realm, which is extremely rare. This record has even surpassed your 9th uncle. When Li Tiangang thought of Li Hao's cultivation realm, his mood brightened and he said to Li Hao with a smile, "Now that I've returned, there's no reason for the second uncle to keep you hidden anymore. Zhao, go and inform your aunt right away. Let the whole mansion know and tell the entire world, the son of Marquis Xing Wu is an unparalleled genius. I want everyone to know that my son's talent is first in 1,000 years." He spoke with boundless pride, as if expressing a burden that had accumulated deep in his heart for many years, his face beaming with smiles. Zhao was overwhelmed with excitement at the moment, his lips trembling slightly. Over the years, he had witnessed Li Hao's maturity and cleverness, his smart talents, and often couldn't help but secretly weep and feel heartbroken, lamenting the injustice of fate, wondering why it withheld the most deserved gift of cultivation talent from Li Hao. To think that now even this last deficiency had been brought to perfection. Hao is unmatched in both talent and intelligence. With that thought, Zhao's entire body trembled, and he immediately agreed excitedly, wiping away the old tears that had trickled from the corners of his eyes. "I will go now, Zhao," but Li Hao stopped him, saying, "First, have someone move all my paintings out of the firewood shed." Zhao was startled but quickly nodded, "Yes." Li Tiangang snapped back to reality, frowning as he thought back to the recent events. His face darkened as he said, "How, heir, with such extraordinary talent, do you still want to indulge in these messy things? If you had practiced diligently with the second uncle over the years, focusing solely on cultivation, maybe you could have reached Grandmaster level by now. How do you know I haven't practiced diligently?" Li Hao looked at him but knew that others would naturally think this way since his facade could never be clearly explained to anyone. There was no need for him to justify himself, and he simply asked, "If I focused solely on becoming a Grandmaster as you wish, then what?" Chapter 98. Li Tiangang didn't hesitate to say that would naturally be a shock to the world, so surprising that perhaps when it gets out, some might not believe it, but other divine general mansions will know that the Li family has produced a once-in-a-millennium genius. Li Hao gazed at him and asked, "Even if I am a once-in-a-millennium genius, what of it?" Li Tiangang was taken aback, feeling there was something off in Li Hao's words, and furrowed his brows as he looked at him. "What do you mean, what of it? Do you have any idea how many people there are in Dayu? How many geniuses? 19 provinces, each with hundreds of cities, tens of thousands of villages and towns, billions upon billions of people. Just counting the geniuses, they are innumerable, as plentiful as carps crossing the river. Top-tier geniuses are indeed rare, but even among one province, dozens can be selected. Yet only those who set foot on the Qiankuan list truly make a name for themselves. And now your talent would deem ranking on the Qiankuan list too low. When your 9th uncle was 19, he stepped into the immortal realm and was already considered a once-in-a-millennium genius. If you reached the Grandmaster realm at 14, you too would be worthy of that title. The further one advances in cultivation level, the more difficult it becomes, just like Li Junyi, who entered the Grandmaster realm at 17 and was once famed throughout the world, but compared to the shock of someone reaching the immortal realm at 19, it is still somewhat lesser. After all, the momentum of a genius can be broken. Most with the 9th grade battle physique could reach the divine travel realm by 15, but that doesn't mean they will necessarily step into the celestial master realm by the age of 20. Many of the same batch of 15-year-olds in the divine travel realm might reach the heavenly human realm by 18, while others might only reach the Grandmaster realm at 30. And when it comes to challenging the immortal realm, that's when an even greater disparity will reveal itself. Li Hao knew all that Li Tiangang was talking about. He glanced at the other, but felt there was no need to pursue the conversation further. He simply turned to Zhao and said, "I must trouble you, Uncle Zhao." "It is no trouble at all," Zhao promptly replied, but Li Tiangang's expression turned ugly. Li Hao's demeanor made it clear he hadn't taken his words to heart. In northern Yen, his word was a military order, and a military order carried the weight of a mountain. A single word was like a rifle bullet, piercing through the ground. "You're not allowed to go." Li Tiangang stopped Zhao in his tracks, then promptly turned to Li Hao. "As long as I am here, you will not touch those nonsensical things again. Besides, I've said it, regardless of your cultivation level, whatever realm you're in, even if you surpass your 9th uncle's talents, You must apologize to your uncle Yuxuan. Yu Xian's expression changed slightly beside him. He bowed to Li Tiangang and said, Lord Ho, let it be. How heir is young and ignorant. I didn't take it to heart. It cannot be let go. Li Tiangang suddenly shouted fiercely. His gaze shifted to Zhao, then swept over to Li Fu, and finally rested on his own son, who was looking back at him with a cold demeanor. What was this expression? Because of your indulgence. He has become so presumptuous. What does having cultivation matter? The Li family isn't short of geniuses, disrespectful towards one's elders. Even if one has an outstanding cultivation level, without proper discipline, what future can one hope for? Zhao and Li Fu were both shocked, not expecting Lord Ho to be so serious after his initial surprise. Li Fu was somewhat stunned. He didn't expect that bringing back such joyous news would result in such a scene. Lord Ho, the young master, has always been like this, and although he did those things, it now seems he hasn't neglected his cultivation. Li Fu began to speak, trying to plead on Li Hao's behalf. He knew of Yu Xian and couldn't comprehend what wrong Li Hao had done to necessitate an apology. However, based on his understanding of Li Hao's temperament, at most it would have been a slip of the tongue. Certainly not a grave mistake warranting such formality. Silence. Li Tiangang rarely shouted at him like that. When administering punishment in the military, he hated it most when others pleaded for leniency or engaged in nepotism. Li Fu's expression changed slightly, and he quickly bowed his head, realizing that in this moment, Lord Ho was not the familial Li Tiangang he interacted with in private, but the unbeatable lord of martial discipline in the army. Zhao wanted to speak, but the stern look from Li Tiangang silenced him. He could only look towards Li Hao with a worried expression. Li Hao fell silent, facing the piercing gaze of the middle-aged man before him. He suddenly felt like laughing, but no laughter came. Was this the fulfillment of the wait he had endured for 14 years alone in the courtyard, gazing up at the starry sky? Yet why couldn't he feel happy at all now? Just yesterday everything was still joyful, still harmonious. Li Hao took a deep breath, and finally not of a youthful temperament. He restrained the unspeakable sense of loss in his heart. Staring at the other person, he said, Indeed, I shouldn't have lost my temper at him, because he didn't do anything wrong. He was just following your orders. Beside him, Yu Xian was slightly stunned, looking at Li Hao with a hint of surprise. The anger in Li Tiangang's eyes had just receded when it surged forth again, his gaze as fierce as a tiger's, emanating an intimidating brilliance. So, are you blaming me? Do you still want to shout at your father to get lost? As he spoke, he felt almost laughed at by his own anger, utterly lawless. Li Hao's fists clenched slightly, but then released. He suddenly wanted to turn away, his gaze casually falling on something else, landing precisely on the weeds beside the courtyard steps. He suddenly felt how similar he was to that clump of weeds. He drew in a deep breath and slowly exhaled, a self-mocking, nonchalant smile curling at the edge of his lips. Have you ever looked at my paintings? You definitely haven't, have you? You said my mother left, but actually, I can barely remember as well, so while I still could remember, I painted her down. The young man's voice crisply echoed, altering the expressions of everyone present. Li Tiangang suddenly froze, his whole body shaking. Those paintings, were they of Qingxing? Naturally, he would not bother to open those shabby scrolls, but he hadn't anticipated this. However, by the time I learned to paint, I had already forgotten what my mother looked like. I could only remember her eyes. Li Hao's gaze settled on the weeds fluttering in the breeze, but his sight was unfocused, his thoughts as if drifting far away. He murmured to himself, so, all I painted was her vague figure. I originally wanted to wait for mother to return, to paint her properly, but mother, she left. The young man's voice plunged the others into silence. Li Tiangang's breathing became slightly heavier, his palm hidden in his sleeve gripped tight involuntarily. At that moment, Li Hao's thoughts seemed to return from afar, back to the courtyard, back to his own frail body. He turned his head to look at his father before him, smiled, and said, You say a grandmaster cannot be insulted? Yes, but I just don't know whether my mother is allowed to be insulted. It sounded like a statement, yet also like a query. These words pierced like a sharp knife, making Li Tiangang feel suddenly suffocated, his sturdy frame trembling slightly. Yu Xian's expression also looked somewhat ugly, having not expected those paintings to contain images of the lady. No wonder the young man was so agitated just now. Reflecting on his own actions, he fell silent. Li Fu and Zhao's eyes were slightly moist as they looked towards Li Tiangang. The young man said nothing more, turned, and left. only saying, "Those scrolls, do with them whatever you please." Watching the young man's retreating figure, Li Tiangang uncontrollably shouted furiously, "Stop." But the young man's steps did not halt and he walked away without stopping. Li Tiangang was briefly at a loss. This was the first time someone defied his words, and that person was his own son. If it were anyone else, he would have already struck. Breaking their limbs, he hadn't dismissed them who dared to be presumptuous in front of him. But Li Hao's recent words had choked his anger at his throat, which soon evaporated, leaving his complexion unspeakably grim. "Master," the young master, seeing his anger, Zhao immediately wanted to speak up in persuasion. Li Tiangang gestured to stop him, took a deep breath and said sternly, "Immediately go and move all the paintings out. Clear the cleanest room for me. Lay them out properly. If there is any damage, everyone will be dealt with under martial law." Zhao was taken aback, relieved, and quickly agreed. Li Tiangang turned to Li Fu and said, "Go inform your elder sister-in-law about Hao Er's progress in the 15 Li realm. Let her be aware. I want to host a family banquet. I want the whole world to know." Li Fu, seeing his change of heart, also inwardly heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly saluted, "I'll go at once." Chapter 99. After Zhao and Li Fu had left, Yu Xian looked at Li Tiangang with hesitant eyes and said, "Marshal, you just returned yesterday, and to have such a conflict and misunderstanding with the young master, it inevitably affects father-son affection. Do you think you should go and comfort the young master?" Li Tiangang glanced in the direction where Li Hao had departed and realized that his own attitude had just been a bit too forceful, yet, thinking of Li Hao's cold gaze, he felt a surge of nameless anger in his heart. He patted Yu Xian on the shoulder and said, "You had to put up with that kid's tantrum today." Yu Xian quickly bowed and said, "You're taking it too seriously, Marshal." "I'm fine, it's just that the young master'll go and see him later." Li Tiangang sighed and said, "Even if I was wrong, this child has been spoiled and arrogant for years and his temper is too big. He even said the painting can be dealt with by us as we please. Since the painting is of Qingqing, his mother, is he really going to abandon it over such a small matter? He really needs a spanking." Yu Xian opened his mouth slightly, wanting to speak but hesitated, not knowing how to persuade. After all, he was also clueless about such matters. Being an orphan from the battlefield, and given the strict rules, it wasn't his place to say much just then. Suddenly, a figure streaked across the sky and approached. Li Tiangang looked up and saw that the newcomer was his second uncle and immediately smiled. "Second uncle." He greeted him proactively and quickened his pace to meet him outside the corridor. "What brings you here, uncle?" "I was just about to thank you." Li Muxiu landed in the courtyard and upon seeing Li Tiangang's sturdy figure, sighed, "You rascal, the years of frontier wind and frost have toughened you up a lot. Where's Qingqing?" Li Tiangang was taken aback and said in a low voice, "She's gone." "Gone?" Li Muxiu immediately frowned and stared at him, asking, "Is she coming back?" Li Tiangang looked at his uncle, puzzled. "I'm asking you," Li Muxiu said impatiently. Li Tiangang hesitantly said, "Second uncle, do you perhaps know about Qingqing Humph? Did you really think you could keep it a secret from everyone? Who didn't know back then? Your father knew, your mother knew." Li Muxiu said irritably, "Otherwise, how could you two have been allowed to marry?" Father and mother both knew. Li Tiangang stood shocked as if struck by lightning, and after a long pause, he came back to his senses and the eyes of this robust man were somewhat moist. Li Muxiu casually released a wave of energy to seal off the surroundings and stared at him. "Tell me honestly, is she coming back?" Li Tiangang clenched his fists and slowly shook his head. "She won't be coming back." "Won't be coming back?" Li Muxiu took a deep breath, then suddenly seemed to think of something and immediately asked, "I was occupied with matters yesterday and wasn't in the mansion. I heard you returned yesterday, so what about the others? Do they know the situation? What about Hao Er? Does he know?" Facing his consecutive questions, Li Tiangang shook his head again. "I didn't go into details. Everyone thinks Qingqing is Hao Er doesn't know?" Li Muxiu immediately asked. Li Tiangang nodded slightly. Li Muxiu paused for a moment, then sighed. He nodded and said, "You did the right thing. It's for the best that Hao Er doesn't know. Since Qingqing won't be coming back, there's no need to let Hao Er know. Just consider her dead." Hearing this, Li Tiangang's body trembled slightly, but in the end, he clenched his fists and said nothing. "Ending the war in northern Yen, it wasn't because of Qingqing, was it?" Li Muxiu suddenly asked. Li Tiangang shook his head slightly and said, "That's only part of it. The main reason is the years of fighting. The Holy Palace has been weakened." Li Muxiu scoffed and said, "These demons. Once Hao Er inherits the true dragon's seat and the family has a successor, I will personally make a trip to meet those 10,000 years demon kings." "Second uncle, the family still needs you to stand guard," Li Tiangang said with a bitter smile. Knowing his second uncle's temper, he changed the subject. "Speaking of Hao Er, I was just about to thank you, second uncle. Thank me for what? It is my duty to take care of Hao Er. He is the only one among these nephews I actually admire. He is different from the other blockheads, including you nephews, all blockheads, Li Muxiu said unreservedly. Li Tiangang, realizing he was also being criticized, could only feel a touch of helplessness but didn't retort. When he and his 8 brothers were young, aside from a few, most were despised by their second uncle. He had not expected Li Hao could actually make his whimsical second uncle so affectionate. Smiling, he said, if it weren't for second uncle giving Hao Er a chance against heaven's will, Hao Er would not have achieved what he has today. I will forever be grateful for this kindness. What? Li Muxiu was startled and said, chance against heaven's will for Hao Er? Huh? Li Tiangang looked at him puzzled. Yu Xian, the young man standing by, also looked at the sea-calming divine needle of the Li family with a hint of surprise on his face. Second uncle, Hao Er is 14 this year and has already cultivated to 15 Li realm. If it weren't for you, Li Tiangang was cut off before he could finish his sentence. You must be mistaken? Li Muxiu suddenly realized what the other was thinking and couldn't help but say irritably, I certainly wanted to give Hao Er a chance against heaven's will with how fond I am of him, but my chance was used up long ago on someone else. How could I have had another opportunity? Moreover, Hao Er's talent is unmatched, extraordinary, even more so than your 9th brother. Why would he need a chance against heaven's will? It's more likely to ruin him than help him. Li Tiangang, having faced many battles, showed a rare look of astonishment. Not second uncle? Hao Er has cultivated to this extent all on his own talent? Yu Xian as well was stunned, looking at the old master in shock. Seeing the astonished look on Li Tiangang's face, Li Muxiu couldn't help but laugh, being able to understand. Chapter 100. After all, with a talent like Li Hao's, even in the Li family, where geniuses spring up like bamboo shoots, he is an overwhelmingly dominant presence. Hao Er is extraordinarily intelligent, beyond the imagination of ordinary people, not just a typical genius, said Li Muxiu with a smile. Li Tiangang came back to reality, startled, and said, but isn't it said that Hao Er's meridians are blocked? He is Li Hao's biological father. The news he heard couldn't possibly be false. There's no need to hide it from him, right? Besides, Li Hao has his mother's bloodline. Such a condition is not impossible. Indeed, the meridians are blocked. Li Muxiu sighed. That's what makes it terrifying. According to Hao Er himself, he suddenly broke through the blockage in his meridians in a dream. I've researched this and found it's a case of pseudo-meridian closure, not completely sealed. This kind of accident is tens of thousands of times rarer than a pure meridian blockage. After all, many children from ordinary families inherit impure blood over the generations, with quite a few cases of meridian blockage. He was around 6 or 7 years old when his meridians became unblocked. Meridian blockage in an ordinary household is not uncommon, but it is rare in the divine general mansion. Li Tiangang's eyes widened in shock. Accustomed to the battlefield, he had seen countless scenes of sword glints and bloodshed without batting an eyelid. But now, he was so astonished he couldn't speak. Does this not mean that Li Hao only began his cultivation at the age of 6 or 7? Without foundation establishment, without blood melting, yet in just 7 years reaching the 15 Li realm? And from what was understood before, Li Hao was not serious about his cultivation on a daily basis, played around everywhere, and barely trained seriously. No wonder, even his second uncle refers to it as terrifying. Li Tiangang had thought the most monstrously talented genius he had seen was his 9th brother. But now he realized that even he paled in comparison to his own son. This is his son. Li Tiangang's body trembled slightly, his heart unable to hide the excitement. Yu Xian was so astounded that he couldn't find his words. The seemingly lazy young master was this formidable? Seeing their reaction, Li Muxiu showed a proud smile, enjoying the look of someone who has not seen the world before. I shouldn't be the only one, along with Feng and the 5th brother, to be shocked. Where's Hao Er? Li Muxiu looked around, still excited. Li Tiangang said, Hao Er should be in his courtyard. Li Muxiu nodded and smilingly said, I came here firstly to see you, and secondly, I have some matters to attend to. Now that you're back, I can go handle them with peace of mind and leave Hao Er in your care. Given Hao Er's cultivation level, he's already capable of wandering the Jianghu. He hardly needs my care, Li Tiangang said with a laugh. Li Muxiu's smile faded slightly, and he glanced at him, meaningfully saying, no matter how strong he is, he's still a 14-year-old child. When I said take care of him, I wasn't worried about him being bullied, but rather about him being left alone. Do you understand? Li Tiangang was stunned. the smile on his face gradually fading into silence. Is it companionship? Suddenly, he remembered Li Hao's recent questions. What if I now do as you wish, aiming single-mindedly for the title of Grandmaster? What then? If I were to be the once-in-a-millennium genius, what then? Li Tiangang couldn't help but take a deep breath, his expression changing. Apparently, what the child wanted to say was, if he performed so well, what would he get from him? Praise from his parents or their companionship? Thinking of his 14 years fighting in northern Yen, Li Tiangang silently sighed, feeling somewhat guilty. He indeed had been neglecting his duties as a father. He said to Li Muxiu, second uncle, I understand. I will take good care of Hao Er and make up for the years of absence. Li Muxiu's face beamed with a smile. All right, I won't say more. I'm going to take a look at Hao Er. Then I'll be on my way, second uncle. May I ask what matter you are going to handle? Li Tiangang quickly asked, a meeting with an old friend, to discuss a matter of rain, said Li Muxiu with a smile, then waved his hand and turned to leave with an air of nonchalance. Li Hao returned to his own courtyard upon entering. A white fox named Xiao Rou leaped out from nowhere and plunged into Li Hao's arms. Coming back to himself, Li Hao realized what was happening and smiled, hugging the white fox and stroking its fur on the head, saying, Where did you run off to earlier? Why didn't I see you around? The white fox looked at him with a pleading gaze, unable to speak, just burying its head in Li Hao's embrace. Li Hao didn't think much of it. Taking the white fox and sitting down at his desk, he glanced at the chessboard beside him. He casually picked up a piece from the chess case, fiddling with it between his fingers, leaning back in his chair with an air of idleness, looking out the window. Suddenly, a figure jumped outside the window, startling Li Hao. What are you doing here, lad? Didn't the fifth brother come to play chess with you? It was Li Muxiu who had come. Li Hao was taken aback for a moment before he came to his senses and smiled. Second grandfather, are you free? Let's go dragon fishing. Li Muxiu looked at him with annoyance and said, Fish for what dragon? Can you even catch one? Your father's back, and you don't spend more time with him. Li Hao's lips curled up slightly, and he chuckled. Last time I managed to catch a lesser dragon. Next time I'm sure I can catch a real dragon. You wish? Last time was just dumb luck, like a blind cat stumbling upon a dead mouse. Li Muxiu gave him a look and then said, They'll be away for a while. If you want to go fishing, find your Uncle Feng. Don't go alone if you can help it. There's an old dragon in that lake I haven't located yet, and although you're at the 15 Li realm, it's still a bit dangerous for you. Li Hao smiled and said, All right. Meanwhile, at the Eternal Spring Court, what? In the main hall, He Jianlin's teacup fell to the carpet, soaking a spot, with tea leaves scattering.